Hormuz, The Last Light. Episode 2, The Cutoff. The warning arrived first as a flicker. Not an explosion. Not a siren. Just a strange, synchronized failure across every screen in the hostel lobby. The news channels blinked out for a split second, then came back with broken audio, frozen faces, and emergency graphics stuttering across the bottom of the frame like a system trying and failing to breathe. Janet was standing at the front desk with a paper cup of terrible coffee when the first real headline hit. China has entered the war. At first, nobody moved. That was the strange part. The room did not erupt immediately. People just stared, waiting for the sentence to become less real if they looked at it long enough. Then the second headline came. American naval communications in the region disrupted. Then the third. Cyber infrastructure failures reported across multiple defense networks. Then the fourth, which made the whole room go cold. U.S. naval assets cut off from Israel and surrounding operation zones. Janet felt the cup go slack in her hand. Tyson, who had been sitting in the corner with his back against the wall and his injured side bandaged as best he could manage, lifted his head the instant he saw her face. He didn't need to ask. He could read bad news the way some people read weather. What happened? He asked. Janet turned the television up. The broadcast was chaotic now. Different anchors. Different feeds. Military analysts talking too fast. Satellite maps flashing red across the screen. One expert was trying to explain that the Chinese attack was not conventional in the old sense. It was layered, multi-domain, terrifyingly coordinated. Cyber systems, satellite interference, signal denial, port disruptions, electronic warfare, and surgical strikes that seemed designed to blind, isolate, and humiliate before the first full confrontation had even begun. The world had expected ships. China had brought architecture-level war. Not just missiles. Not just fleets. The collapse of visibility. The collapse of trust. The collapse of the systems everyone depended on but nobody understood well enough to defend. Tyson sat straighter now, his face hardening in the way it did when fear had to be packed away behind discipline. He stared at the screen as a map of the eastern Mediterranean filled with red exclusion zones. Naval channels were being jammed. Air corridors were changing by the minute. American units were no longer just under attack, they were being cut loose. Janet could feel the room changing around them. People were no longer watching as tourists. They were watching as citizens whose return home had become theoretical. Then the Chinese president appeared on television. The room went silent. He stood at a podium with the kind of stillness that made him look carved rather than living. Behind him, flags hung without movement. His face did not show triumph. That was what made it worse. He looked composed, almost clinical, like a surgeon announcing the removal of something diseased. Janet leaned toward the screen. He spoke in a firm, measured voice, and the interpreter followed a beat behind him. There was no rage in his tone. That was the horror of it. No shouting. No theatrical venom. Just cold certainty. He said that China had taken U.S. military hostages. He said it was proof that the United States had forced the world into a binary of loyalty and hostility. He said that when President Trump declared, "If you are not with us, you are against us," he had drawn a line that China was now answering directly. Then the president of China looked straight into the camera and said, "We are against the United States of America." Nobody in the hostel breathed. Somebody in the back began to cry softly. Not loud enough to make a scene. Just enough to sound like the room itself had started to break. Tyson's jaw tightened so hard Janet thought it might crack. Janet felt a cold wave run through her body. She had spent her life watching powerful men weaponize language in boardrooms and hearings, but this was different. This was a declaration designed to travel faster than fear. The television stayed on, but no one in the room seemed to trust it anymore. Outside, somewhere beyond the hostel walls, a muffled blast rolled across the city like thunder with no sky. Tyson and Janet. Tyson stood up too fast and nearly lost his balance. Janet grabbed his arm before he could fall. "They're going to start searching areas," he said. "If they think I'm military." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. He was still wearing his uniform, still marked by everything that had happened to him. To the people outside, he was not a stranded survivor. He was a target, a soldier, a symbol, maybe even leverage. Janet looked at him and understood instantly. "You can't stay in that," she said. Tyson's eyes flicked to the windows, then back to her. "I know." The hostel lobby had become a theater of panic. People were standing in clusters now, all trying to figure out whether the next step was evacuation, shelter, or denial. There were no clear instructions. Just fragments, rumors, emergency alerts. 1,000 private decisions being made all at once. Janet took Tyson by the elbow. "Come on." She led him up the stairs to the shared room she had been assigned with 2 other stranded tourists who were currently gone, probably trying to find answers in the lobby or on the roof or anywhere that wasn't a screen. The room looked like every temporary room in every temporary crisis. One unmade bed, one suitcase half open, chargers tangled by the wall, a cheap curtain drawn against the afternoon light. Janet shut the door behind them. Tyson stood there for a second, still in his damaged uniform, as if he had not yet accepted that the war outside had crossed into this tiny room with them. "Take it off," Janet said. He looked at her, surprised. "Your uniform," she clarified. "If anyone sees you dressed like that right now, they're going to know exactly who you are." He nodded once and began stripping off the jacket with stiff, mechanical movements. The fabric was torn, salt-stained, and marked with the chaos of the beach. Janet turned away for a moment out of instinct, then began opening the luggage of the other tourists with shaking hands. Not to steal, to survive. A woman's duffel bag. A man's carry-on. A suitcase with souvenirs still inside. A stack of wrinkled t-shirts. A pair of loose cargo pants. A hoodie that smelled faintly of airport air conditioning and cheap detergent. Janet brought the clothes to Tyson. He took them with a nod, then sat on the edge of the bed and changed as fast as his injured body would allow. Janet kept watch at the window, heart pounding every time a shadow passed below. When he was done, he looked less like a Marine and more like what he was trying to become in that moment. A man who could disappear. She pulled a cap down over his hair, tucked the uniform into a laundry bag, shoved it deep inside the closet under towels and travel brochures. For one brief, surreal second, the room looked almost normal. Then another explosion rolled through the city, and the ceiling light trembled. Tyson looked at her. "They're not just fighting," he said. "They're isolating." Janet swallowed. "You mean us?" "Everyone." He gestured to the television, where satellite feeds had become patchy and uneven. The commentary was now full of phrases like signal degradation, kinetic disruption, hostage verification, regional denial, communications blackout. Janet had heard corporate jargon her whole life. This was worse. This was language trying to disguise the fact that the world had entered a new kind of violence. A cleaner kind. A colder kind. A smarter kind. A kind that could shut an army off from the map before a single bullet was fired. The emotional turn. Janet sat down on the edge of the other bed, suddenly exhausted in a way that no amount of sleep could fix. Her hands were still shaking. "This was supposed to be a work trip," she said, almost laughing from disbelief. "I was supposed to be back in New York, in a conference room, pretending to care about an email chain and a merger timeline." Tyson sat across from her, elbows on knees, looking like a man trying to hold a shattered timeline together with his bare hands. "You still want partner?" he asked quietly. The question hit harder than she expected. Janet stared at him, at the ruined room, at the suit jacket she had packed for a return flight that probably didn't exist anymore, at the impossible shape of her life now. "Yes," she said after a while. "I do." Tyson nodded as if that made sense. "Then don't die in a hostel in Israel," he said. "Not after all that." And somehow, in the middle of the collapse, that almost made her smile. Almost. End scene. The emergency broadcast in the hallway began repeating evacuation instructions in Hebrew and English, but the English was broken and the signal kept skipping. Outside, military vehicles were moving faster now, boots hitting pavement, engines revving, helicopters clattering overhead.